I would like to welcome our first speaker, Denise Gabuzda. Denise is from Cork Meeting and teaches physics and astronomy at University College Cork. She is also the clerk of Ireland Yearly Meeting, and her scientific and spiritual lives converge on learning to live sustainably as a key task of our time. And she will be speaking on creating a sustainable future that can lead us back into harmony with both ourselves and creation. Denise, you can unmute yourself, and when you feel ready to speak, do begin.
First of all, thank you very much, Brian, for reminding me to unmute myself, because this would have been a very quiet talk otherwise. I'm not going to speak for as much as 20 minutes. And what I'm going to do is share with you and explore my own vision of how we might live our lives in a sustainable future, how our minds might be opened and our lives improved. Some aspects of the sustainable future I've created in my own mind will be familiar, while others may be unexpected. One thing we must bear in mind throughout is that creating a sustainable future is a spiritual endeavor. Ancient peoples were aware of the interconnectedness of all living things. They instinctively felt that they were part of creation, not apart from creation. This is also true of some modern-day indigenous peoples living in traditional ways. However, most modern humans in both rich and poor cultures are losing this sense of a direct physical and spiritual connection with the earth. The richness of life on earth is almost unimaginable. For example, the soil beneath our feet looks to the casual eye to be more or less inert, but is actually teeming with life. A handful of fertile soil contains thousands of species and billions of bacteria. Imagine all the handfuls of soil all around the globe, together with all the plants that soil supports and all the animals supported by the plants, and it begins to feel natural to talk about Pachamama, to use an indigenous South American name, or as we would know it, Mother Earth. But even farmers who work closely with Earth are made to feel detached from the soil they till due to the impersonal and mechanized nature of mass agriculture. The earth is being enslaved and abused by agriculture aimed at crop yield, at the expense of the health of the soil and the biodiversity it should be able to support. And the farmers who are forced to carry out this abuse by our economic system are also emotionally and spiritually damaged by this experience. In fact, we're all emotionally and spiritually damaged by the many ways in which we are torn away from Mother Earth by our industrialized and in some ways overly technological society. We're also damaged by the ways in which our society isolates us from each other. Deep down, we know this. We yearn for a world where we have technology and comfortable lives, but can also have a flourishing natural world and vibrant communities that foster healthy interpersonal relationships. And it's not too late to make this a reality. Creating a sustainable future can lead us back into harmony with both ourselves and creation. What might a sustainable future look like? One in which we truly work together with nature, rather than allowing our perceived needs to dominate those of all other creatures on Earth. What would our lives in such a world be like? Envisaging such a future in an authentic way requires us to bring into question and ultimately reject some ideas that are deeply embedded in our current worldview. As one example, we often take for granted that new inventions and new technologies will take away drudgery and better our lives. This is certainly true to some extent, but in fact, many people are having to work harder and harder to maintain a basic standard of living, despite the fact that our domestic work has been drastically reduced over the past number of decades by any number of labor-saving devices. A recent anthropological study by Mark Dibble and his colleagues has shown that hunter-gatherers in the Philippines who become farmers work around 10 hours a week longer than they did as foragers, with the shift to settled agriculture impacting most negatively on the lives of women. The need to have women join in the agricultural work also has a detrimental effect on their children and their families, because they're not free to care for them as well as they had previously. We assume that the transition from foraging to settled agriculture must have come about because it enabled communities to meet their needs with less work. This seems logical to us. However, such research has found that hunter-gatherers actually have quite a lot of leisure time, more than people in societies who get their food from farming, and more than we do in the modern world. To me, this is sending a clear signal that our society and our lives are out of balance. We've missed something somewhere, something crucial. What are we working so hard for? And is this really in the best interest of ourselves and the world around us? I believe that one aspect of a more balanced, sustainable world should certainly be that we'll be able to work less, and our work will be more meaningful. We'll have more time for family and friends, leisure activities, contemplation, reflection, or just daydreaming. This will also open more space for imagination and creativity. This will be true for both the adults and the children in our society. More unprogrammed time to let our imaginations run free. Moreover, we'll be liberated from a crude, quantity-based work ethic that says working more is better, and if you want to work less, that means you're lazy. We'll be valued for the quality of our work, not the amount of time we spend on it. We'll also spend less time getting to and from work, either because we're able to live close enough to work to get there on foot or by bicycle, or because we can do much of our work from home. This would have seemed difficult to realize before the pandemic, but our experience over the past 4 months has shown that many jobs can, in fact, be done at least as efficiently from home. This is possible in part through the use of technology like Zoom that locations to communicate together. We will use such technology to reduce unnecessary and time-consuming travel and also to promote inclusivity. The health of our society will be measured in terms of the overall well-being of its citizens, rather than using financial measures such as gross national product or rate of economic growth. In fact, the idea of measuring the health of a society based on economic growth will become laughable, and we'll be amazed that we did this for so long. After all, how can anything keep on growing forever? We'll live in a zero-growth economy, which will offer us a stable, not stagnant economic system. Our society will be much less unequal. This will have far greater ramifications than is obvious at first glance. It has been shown by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett in their book, The Spirit Level, that the level of inequality in a society is a key factor determining the severity of a very wide range of social problems. Drug use, teen pregnancy, racism, crime rates, poverty, and so forth. The list is very long. Inequality is also correlated with various health measures and health issues, such as rates of physical illnesses, mental health problems, obesity, infant mortality rate, and life expectancy. More equal societies have less severe social problems and higher levels of physical health and mental well-being. And interestingly, they also tend to have lower levels of carbon emissions, be more environmentally aware, and be less consumer-driven. The increased equality of our society will be manifest in many positive ways. One way this increased equality might come about could be through the introduction of a universal basic income scheme, which will pay every member of our society an income that is sufficient to cover their basic needs. This may sound like an unrealistic idea, pie in the sky. However, I've recently learned that the new Irish government has promised to try out an Irish universal basic income pilot scheme within 5 years. Our consumer choices will be guided by a desire to keep our ecological footprints lighter in a way that also improves the quality of our lives. We'll buy things that may cost more initially, but will last longer, and use sustainable materials to make the things we need. For example, making furniture of wood, which captures carbon. We'll eat more locally and naturally grown food. We'll be more in touch with the natural rhythm of the seasons, not feeling the need to have every type of food available all year round, and understanding that local food that is in season is the most delicious. We'll live more simply, but no less richly. Of course, our energy will come from renewable sources: solar, wind, water, tidal, geothermal. We'll also be leading lifestyles that require us to use less energy. Our homes will be designed to be energy efficient and to passively keep us comfortably cool in summer and warm in winter. We'll live in neighborhoods designed so that most shops, schools, and other public amenities are within walking or bicycling distance, so that we usually don't need to use a car to do our errands. The extra exercise we get will help keep us physically fit and mentally alert. We'll also know our neighbors better because we are all out and about more on foot, making our communities stronger. I've gotten to know a number of my neighbors much better over the past 4 months, regularly crossing paths with dog walkers and others out on errands as I've made my way back and forth to our local shop. There will be fewer private cars, and those that there are will be electric. We'll use well-connected public transport, which will also be electric. This will have a transformative effect on our urban areas. Less congested streets, much less vehicle noise, and much cleaner air. In addition to putting carbon dioxide into the air, burning oil products also gives rise to a variety of other noxious emissions. We've had a glimpse of the positive effect that having fewer and only electric vehicles will have on our cities through our experience with lockdown. Only once we had far fewer petrol and diesel vehicles on the roads did it become clear just how much noise and air pollution they were creating. We'll travel by airplane much less, and flying will be much more expensive. This means seeing friends and family who live far away in person less often, and we'll make use of platforms such as Zoom to keep in touch. Most professional conferences will also be held remotely. Perhaps once every few years, we'll make a long trip to a distant part of the globe, taking time to travel on the surface. We'll be entitled to extra time off work once every, perhaps 4 years in order to take such a trip. We'll have set aside a considerable portion of the earth as protected areas where nature can thrive, and live in cities with green areas where biodiversity is also protected locally and regionally. It has been proposed that we set aside half of the earth for nature. We are one out of about 6.5 million animal species living on land. We can surely make do occupying half the surface of our planet. Watching videos made during lockdown of goats wandering through a seaside town and sheep riding on a roundabout in a children's playground makes me wonder whether it might just be possible to share our space amicably with other wild or feral creatures too. The earth will be a more peaceful place. The process of working together to limit the increase in global temperatures to no more than 1.5 degrees has shown us that what we have in common is far more important than our differences. A more equitable distribution of resources has started to come about, making people the world over less fearful for the future. This is just a vision or a dream at present of a creative and joyful future in which we have regained our balance and we viscerally feel our deep spiritual connection with the earth and with that of God in all living things. Some irreparable damage has been done to the earth, and many species have sadly been lost forever. But in this vision, we will have willingly agreed to let nature take her course on a large fraction of our planet's surface, giving her time and space to heal and ultimately to thrive. As our planet heals, so will we, becoming spiritually whole again and rediscovering our instinctive understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. This future is by no means the most likely one at present, but it is possible through a combination of open-mindedness, out-of-the-box thinking, creative and responsible development and use of technology, determination, openness to new ways of living, and openness to the spirit. Close your eyes and let yourself imagine a future like this. This is a key step toward allowing.
Thank you for that, Denise. Our next speaker is Oana Sanziana Marian, who is a Romanian-born, US-raised artist and writer, currently pursuing a PhD in theology at Trinity College Dublin. She is a co-founder of the Active Hope Network, a community that aims to bridge political activism, spirituality, and collective thinking. She will be speaking on the importance of spirituality in the social and political work needed to ensure that our future visions of thriving include everyone. Oana, you can unmute yourself, and when you feel ready to begin, do.
Thank you to all who are gathered here and to the gatherers. Thank you that nourished me morning and that made it and brought earth, the rain, the pollination, other creatures that made that possible, and adding name who made it all. Thank you from the Liberties in Dublin. Maybe to establish at the start that the person speaking to you has, from the age of 8, been defined by an experience of immigration. I moved to the US from communist Romania in 1988, and from the age of 18, something more like migrancy, as I have not lived anywhere longer than 3 years since then. I moved to Dublin in 2017, and so far have no plans to leave. So this may be the year I break this pattern. There are aspects of my life, being identified as white, having the biological gender that feels right to me, being educated and located in the global north, that align me to a degree with what is considered normal, what is considered power within society. There are likewise aspects of my identity that call me to value what exists in the margins, whether voluntarily there or not. Quaker faith and history are themselves proof that there is imagination and creativity and a moral imperative in the margins. Having said that, I would like to warn you that although I deeply believe in the vision that Denise has described, a future as clear and as beautiful as can be, I also simultaneously hold space for an equally deep call within me to learn how to die well, as an individual and possibly as a species. These are not contradictory ideas. I believe that learning how to grieve well in this moment, paradoxically, is an invitation to greater life. For this, I will make use of some very strange ancient scripture. And I want to say that the text, a modified version of the text that I'm sharing with you, will, in an edited form, appear in a book called Words for a Dying World, edited by Hannah Malcolm. I want to start with the words of a more recent prophet, that of the Nigerian Indian writer and theologian Bayo Akomolafe. And he says, "My dream is not of human rights and inclusion into an exhausted colonial order. My dream is an electric hymn sung by gut bacteria, of cell transfers that queer sources, unsettle originals, and disturb the idea that identity is coherent or articulable." I fully embraced my own queerness and began studying Christian theology at around the same time in 2014. I identify with queerness specifically from the LGBTQ+ list because I feel like Bayo Akomolafe that identity, my identity, is not necessarily coherent or articulable. It is otherwise, and otherwise is what I mean by queerness. When I enter Christian spaces created specifically for queer people, it becomes obvious to me that I am more comfortably out about being queer than I am about the forms of faith that I practice. There are people who preserve a wild space within the parameters of Christian identity, and I often feel that Quaker silent worship is such a wild space. So I've also experienced this in more traditional forms of Christianity. Rejection within my family on the basis of sexuality came from a very different interpretation of Christianity, similar to interpretations that historically gave moral justification for the plundering of land and people and imaginations, bearing no minor responsibility for the ecological disasters we face now. And here, I would say that it is important for Christians, including Quakers, to reckon with these histories, but that is not what I mean to talk about now. In the face of ecological threats, the most appropriate human responses are also the ones to which we are most resistant, many of us. Grief, atonement, repair, humility. And if we allow ourselves those, then also wonder, compassion, joy, gratitude, praise. In my 35th year in 2014, I had what I can only imprecisely describe as a conversion experience. Not a new call to faith, but an identity-changing awakening to impending ecological disaster. This happened in the midst of significant personal upheaval, among which the death of a lifelong friend and the not unexpected but still devastating rejection by a parent after I met the woman I would end up marrying. falling in love, as much as losing loved ones, displaces, even annihilates significant parts of the self. And maybe this is, as the theologian John Zizioulas has suggested, in order to make room for the other. In any case, this word annihilation best describes my preoccupation during this time. It is one thing to be informed about ocean acidification, accelerating rates of extinction, and another thing altogether to know, to metabolize the disaster within one's body, through which all experience is mediated. And it is important to emphasize this. As the systems theorist Joanna Macy has written, all the threats facing us in this planet time, be they toxic waste, world hunger, or global warming, come down in the final analysis to threats to the body. The catalyst for my awakening to ecological threat was a Guardian article about the text Limit to Growth, written by MIT researchers for an international think tank in 1972. On the 1st of September in 2014, the headline read, 4 decades after the book was published, Limit to Growth's forecasts have been vindicated by new Australian research. Expect the early stages of global collapse to start soon. More affecting than the article itself was a graph that showed the 1972 data lines for industrial output, global pollution, food per capita, non-renewable resources remaining, etc. And alongside them, the same data observed between 1970 and 2000. Lines which matched the MIT researchers' figures nearly exactly. Every line takes a dramatic nosedive between the years 2025 and 2050. Like all the newly converted, I spent months in states of hypersensitivity to my new reality, a wild-eyed, skinless alertness, intense incredulity at the unbelief of others, a relentless impulse to evangelize, accompanied by a kind of paranoia about a world that had conspired to withhold big truth from me. We didn't yet have the language of climate grief, and now that we do, I don't know how helpful it is. It's only in a world sense that imagines the earth and all of creation as separate from human kinship that climate grief becomes its own category. Otherwise, it's simply grief. I knew somehow at the time that the deaths of friends and relationships and reckoning with queer identity and losing the earth were intertwining wildernesses, each grief deepening the others. Still, I held faithfully to one of the few assurances I have as a writer, that the splintering of the self can with time be recollected or recollected in language. This is no mere metaphor. Neuroscience has shown us that not only is the brain plastic, but the hippocampus, which is responsible for memories, regenerates quite rapidly. Moreover, the gut, sometimes referred to as the second brain, does as much, if not more, of what we imagine the brain does. It thinks, it feels, it builds blocks of behavior that turn into moods, convictions, identities, and those cells regenerate every 2 to 9 days. So we are made and remade, fearfully and wonderfully and continuously. So I had wanted to reframe my loss of family, of the ability to imagine a future, by writing about the past, by exploring big grief, having settled into it a little bit, through the lens of an apocalyptic text that I was studying in 2014. Headlines such as 12 years to avert climate disaster, or more like 18 months, made me think it was a good moment to talk about apocalypses. Then, in January of this year, my 43-year-old brother died suddenly and inexplicably of a heart attack. Exorbitant funerary transport costs meant that he was cremated before family or friends thousands of miles away could see him. I flew to the US at the end of January, and 3 weeks after I returned to Ireland, the entire world constricted with the pandemic. The phrase, I didn't get to say goodbye, ascended like a chorus of lament. My voice was just one of many. I'd like to tell you more about my brother, about the world that ended when he left the world, but that is for a different occasion. More recently, another Guardian headline read, "World has 6 months to avert climate crisis," says energy expert. Here is where I find myself now. Not only is apocalypse not a subject of the past, but much like grief, it does not conform to linear time or logical narrative. There is not a straightforward way forward. Wherever you are hearing this, please do not forget that we are not in control, we do not know everything, and that our end, the end of all creatures, is still always continually unfolding. In the apocalyptic imagination, John Collins describes apocalyptic writing, and I am paraphrasing here, as stories about divine revelations through visions or otherworldly journeys, imparting knowledge about end times, final judgment, and the establishing of God's kingdom. And the word apocalypse itself just means unveiling of the truth. The apocryphal book of 4th Ezra is an apocalypse partially composed sometime after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 CE. The true author is unknown, but in the story, the Jewish scribe Ezra, exiled in Babylon sometime between the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, pleads with God to help him understand why God allows evil in God's own creation. In response, Ezra receives 7 visions through the mediation of the angel Uriel. Again and again, Ezra demands quantitative, logical answers to many anxious, often angry questions that I, as a dual US-EU citizen, can very much relate to. He asks, why is an evil empire allowed to continue to wreak havoc on those who honor their covenant? When the angel responds that the current world will pass, Ezra's desperation deepens. When will the new age come? How much time remains? I'm asking 12 years, 18 months, 6 months. Ezra asks, when and how will the end come? I'm wondering, plague, wars, collapse of biodiversity, food system, fires and floods. Why do we have to wait and suffer through successive generations? Ezra asks. Why did God not make all of creation at the same time and pass judgment immediately? Is there more time behind us or ahead of us? Will there be more who are damned than saved? Will I be alive in those days? Why make the world only to destroy it? I feel the question behind Ezra's question here too. Why make us as we are and then destroy us for being as we are? The angel's responses are, shall we say, less than consoling. Lo, there are days coming when those who inhabit the earth shall be seized with great terror, and the ways of truth shall be hidden, and the land shall be barren of faith. The land that you see now ruling shall be a trackless waste, and people shall see it desolate, and one shall reign whom those who inhabit the earth do not expect. And here I'm thinking of the election in 2016. And the birds shall fly away together, and the Dead Sea shall cast up fish, and one whom the many do not know shall make his voice heard by night, and all shall hear his voice. There shall be chaos also in many places. Fire shall often break out. The wild animals shall roam beyond their haunts. Not a great picture. It is easy to ascribe the power of this text to the way it seems to predict this very moment of terror, fake news, confusion, collapse of ecosystems, fires, displaced wildlife. With a little reflection, the text also feels like an oracle. I'm reminded of the ways that the Black freedom movement in the US was born under the precarious cover of hush harbors as the religion of the enslaved. Once heard only by night in those hush harbors, the affirmation that Black Lives Matter is now heard by all. But that oracular quality is only one source of its power. Another is this formal disregard for linear time. This text, remember, was written after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, but it was written as if written in the 6th century BCE by the Jewish prophet Ezra, who was predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in the future. So, a bit of time traveling. Why would such a genre exist? Much like authors of science fiction, the apocalyptic writers might have used time-bending narratives and revelation rather than linear rational argument as a strategy to help hold the psyche intact, to imagine possibilities of life, and to create some sense of control during times of profound and widespread uncertainty when logic and reason predict only further ruin. For example, against the backdrop of settler colonialist state destruction and denigration of Black and Indigenous life, there are these genres of what's called Afrofuturist and Indigenous futurist forms of art and literature that affirm at the very basic level that Black and Indigenous people exist and thrive in the future. This is a radical act. It is a way of acknowledging, maybe as the apocalyptic writers of 4th Ezra were also doing, that again, we are not in control. We do not know everything. And there is power, even divine power, in the imagination. There are a few key moments when the source of Ezra's authority is primarily his own human intellect, especially this rational, linear argument. However, revelation, the unveiling of all that he doesn't know, shatters his self-righteousness, making way for a more compassionate position within his own suffering. Later in the text, the angel commissions Ezra to write the story of the world, and more importantly, instructs him. Set your house in order, reprove your people, comfort the lonely among them, and instruct those that are wise. The consolation is not a triumphalist hope about the end of all suffering and that it won't take place, but a call for Ezra first to mind himself and his own affairs, and then to meet others where they are according to their capacity to hear, rather than proselytizing about the end of the world. It would not be an exaggeration to say that in 2014, I was constitutionally changed by the deep wisdom of this text, which also helped me to move from a position of at first grief-stricken and then self-righteous alienation toward a more participatory form of belonging in the world, even while acknowledging that the world I knew was and is possibly dying. I'm not suggesting that scientific data is wrong, nor am I suggesting that a biblical text provides answers that research can't. I'm looking instead with a degree of suspicion at the ways we cling to certainties, especially when anxious. Even this idea of the Anthropocene, the name given to the age we live in, literally meaning the age of man, emerged from a very Western ideological tradition. It names the calamitous human impact on the earth, but it relies on data sets and doomsday clocks, the pressures of evidence-based projections of the exact hour of our demise. And this is always in binaries. In other words, we can only either ever save or lose the earth. And these either-or options are habits of thinking similar to those that have led to the disaster we are in. Because to believe we can only fail, continuing on the trajectory we read in the news, denies the power of the imagination, especially the imagination of the margins. But to believe only that we have to frantically search for solutions and that by doing so we will save the world through sheer human will, this also denies the real need for grief for what has already been lost and what we may still lose. What if the truth is something humbler and stranger and more otherwise?
Thank you for that, Oana. Our next speaker is Féidhilim Harty, who is from Cork and Limerick meetings and works as an environmental consultant, operating his own business, FH Wetland Systems Limited. He is also an author, and his most recent book is entitled Towards Zero Waste, How to Live a Circular Life. And Féidhilim will be speaking on 5 things that we can do for the environment. Féidhilim, when you're ready to speak.
Thanks, Brian. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Hello, friends, and welcome to today's workshop. It's lovely to see all your faces here as I look around the page and to hear those talks by Oana and Denise. And I'm finding that after Oana's talk, I'm quite landed and grounded and slow to open my mouth and break the spell. As Brian said, what I want to talk about are the 5 things we can do for the environment. And this is a talk, it's an adaptation of a talk that I gave at the request of Limerick meeting a number of years back. So as we look at the state of the world around us and the impacts that we're having on the natural world and on one another, it can be quite overwhelming. And it can often be difficult to know how best to respond. So what I'd like to do is suggest 5 things that we can do in our own lives that can make a difference. And in summary, firstly, we can spend our money consciously and support suppliers and businesses who are actively building a better world. Secondly, we can do less and buy less, living more simply, so that our ecological footprint is reduced. Thirdly, we can speak truth to power and put governments and corporations under pressure to do the right thing rather than the usual thing, advocating for change in policies and practices that are causing harm and actively blocking the way towards a healthy world and a healthy society. Fourthly, we can build and strengthen connections with others to help bring about the changes that we want to see in the world. And lastly, we can remain optimistic about our chances of creating a bright future together and reimagine a clear vision of a beautiful, happy, and abundant earth. So let's look at these 5 things in a bit more detail. The first thing is to spend money consciously. There's a story in the Native American tradition about 2 wolves. One is gentle and kind, caring and generous, protective and nurturing. The other is mean and aggressive, greedy and selfish. And these 2 wolves battle endlessly with one another within our hearts and within our minds, each one vying for control. And the question that inevitably gets asked is, which wolf wins? To which the answer comes back, the one you feed. So our behaviors and our decisions are the food for these wolves, and the one that dominates is the one that we feed, bit by bit, day after day, year after year. And so too in the world. Each time we spend our money, we support companies that either poison the planet or nurture it. With the help of our current global economic system, we've been dangerously overfeeding a wolf that threatens to devour us all. By changing how we spend our money, we can instead feed the wolf that protects us and our future. We can buy organic produce and farm at farmers' markets. We can buy clothes that are fair trade, organic, or second-hand. We can buy unbleached recycled paper for our offices. We can source organic seeds for our gardens. We can use homeopathy, acupuncture, or herbalism instead of drugs and their harmful side effects. We can build well-insulated houses out of local timber instead of high-energy concrete. And we can use compost loos or treat sewage using plants rather than electric pumps. There are so many ways that our decisions impact on the earth, but each decision can have a positive impact rather than a negative one. Actively feeding the good wolf, actively building a world that we can be proud to hand over to our children and to our grandchildren. The second thing is to live more simply, to do less and to buy less. I thought we were doing pretty well with our waste minimization endeavours, down to about 1 bin of rubbish every 6 months, with more frequent runs to the recycling centre for glass and metal and plastics. And then 2 things converged on my mind at the same time. China stopped importing European waste plastics for recycling, and the proposed LNG terminal on the Shannon Estuary got extended planning permission from An Bord Pleanála. In the first instance, China had been busy receiving vast streams of supposedly clean washed plastics for recycling, and it turned out that the plastic wasn't as clean or as washed as they needed. So they got fed up with sorting our rubbish. Suddenly, the big clean bag of plastics in our shed looked much more like out-and-out junk than a valuable resource in somebody else's production line. Secondly, the Shannon and Cork liquid natural gas terminals that are designed to import fracked gas from the US into Europe came into more public awareness and came into the spotlight more. One of the uses for fracked gas is to make plastics. So a lot of that plastic sitting in our shed might well be made on the backs of communities in the US destroyed by the fracking industry. Fracking also has a carbon footprint a lot worse than coal. So it's not something that we can afford to continue if we want to tackle climate breakdown. So with those 2 events converging, I recognized afresh the need to avoid plastics as much as possible. I was reminded of Gandhi's phrase, to live simply, so that others might simply live. Sometimes we don't just need to buy the better thing, or the organic thing, or the more durable thing. Sometimes we need to not buy that thing. At its core, simplicity is a conscious choice to voluntarily step back from consumerism. One side of the coin is buying less. The flip side is noticing that this brings with it a reduced pressure to earn as much. So we spend less and we work less, generate less waste to deal with, and have less pressure to bring in money. This is a win for the planet, and it's a win for ourselves and our own lives. The third thing on the list is to engage in advocacy, to speak truth to power. Have you ever had the feeling that nothing ever changes, no matter how much effort and energy you pour into it? Well, remember that in the time of Henry VIII, homosexuality was punishable by death. By the time of Oscar Wilde, this was reduced to a term of imprisonment. And now, through the concerted awareness raising of many, many people, gay marriages can happen in Ireland and in our meeting houses. Women couldn't vote on these islands 100 years ago. Poor people couldn't vote here 200 years ago. Arguably, poor people are still grossly underrepresented, but that's a matter for a petition somewhere. Legal slavery was once the mainstay of the global economy. Black people in the US couldn't sit with white people on public transport, go to school together or work together. If you were native to Australia in 1970, you could be shot and killed, quite legally. All of these things changed for the better only through a concerted process of putting pressure on governments to do the right thing instead of the old thing. In Ireland, we've had a recent string of examples of advocacy paying off. Smoking is banned in public buildings, making it far less appealing to our young people to start. The tax on plastic bags has played a major part in cleaning up our countryside. Land-based fracking is now banned. The state has also to divest from fossil fuel shares and investments, the first country in the world to declare to do so. Whether you write a letter or email, phone a politician or a company, or take to the streets, the essence of advocacy can be summed up in Jack Charlton's famous phrase, put them under pressure. A couple of years ago, a rather significant event happened. Globally, the incentives, subsidies, and tax breaks for renewable energy exceeded those for fossil fuels for the first time. I find that quite incredible. It shows us that the world is changing for the better, but it also shows us something else, that obscene amounts of money, of our tax money, subsidize some of the richest and most dangerous industries on earth, industries that are threatening the whole planet. Driving less is certainly important as an individual choice, but that our hard-earned tax money should be paid out in subsidies for oil and coal and gas should be changed immediately. And yes, there are campaigns to help make those changes. Look up change.org, uplift.ie, someofus.org, and avaz.com for a whole host of petitions and actions that are challenging the madness of business as usual. The fourth thing is to hold hands, to build our connections with others. We are social animals. It's really incredible what we can do when we work together. I was walking along the road at Shannon Airport a little while back and was suddenly struck with a profound sense of wonder. It wasn't your typical spiritual experience scene. On my left was the estuary, beautiful and expansive. But on the right was a vast sea of cars, all waiting for their drivers to fly back home. It was like a huge collection of brightly coloured beetles, all sitting there on a great grey slab. Airport sounds carried over the roads and buildings and enormous signposts. These are all strong symbols of the madness of our age. Cars, roads, flashing signs, flights, all quintessential climate change antagonists. And yet, what I felt was a deep sense of wonder, of love actually, a sense of awe at the phenomenal achievements of the human imagination and the power of our cooperative spirit. All of what lay to the landward side of the road was shaped by so many different people working together. People from all across the globe holding hands to produce tires and windshield wipers, the software for the display board, the paper for the ticket machines, the glass in the building, the paint along the road, all of it part of a vast network of supply chains built on interdependence at a global scale. Working together, we've created incredible things in the world, but we've been motivated by the wrong set of guidelines. The so-called invisible hand of the market is throttling our long-term capacity to survive. And for a great many people, it's taken away our capacity for a dignified life in the meantime. Even as I felt wonder at the human achievements on one side of the road, I was acutely aware of the rising tide on the other. The road at the Shannon Airport car park is in itself a flood defence system. Ironically, it's one that may be hopelessly inadequate to cope with the consequences of our high carbon lifestyles. A good portion of Limerick City lies below existing high tide level. But by holding hands with those around us who are working in a positive direction, we can bring about wondrous changes in the world. Together, we can rebuild topsoil in our farms and gardens by composting manure and human manure and kitchen organic waste. We can clean our rivers and seas by reinstating wetlands and wooded buffer zones in low-lying farmland and by filtering urban runoff through reed beds. We can plant billions of native trees to feed pollinators and birds and store carbon and provide building materials for the future. We can shift every endeavour, every single thing we do, and every product and service from being part of the problem to being part of the solution. All this will require cooperation on a huge scale, but we've already shown that we can work on vast projects together. Remember that we change the world not through one-off heroic acts, but simply by linking up with one another and working together. So hold hands with local organic growers and producers, with artisan bakers, with ethical clothing suppliers and green builders. Team up with neighbours to plant orchards, grow food, dig a pond, plant a local woodland. Hold hands in the park, or as you stroll by the sea or by the river, watching a beautiful sunset together. Create time to hold hands with friends, family, the young people around us, and the old, with the newborn and the dying. Finally, the fifth thing is to hold the vision, to imagine a bright future. I believe that we need to remain optimistic about our chances and hold a positive vision of the future very clearly in our minds. This is not to deny the scale of the challenge before us, more an acknowledgement that miracles happen all the time. If we hold a very clear picture in our minds of a clean and beautiful world, we're much more likely to achieve it than if we believe the media myth of scarcity and division. Top athletes know that to succeed, they need to train the mind as well as the body. Quantum physics is finding that as we view the world, we change it. Energy and matter are directly interrelated. Our thoughts influence our reality. With a clear vision of a beautiful earth, we can help usher in a spontaneous remission for the many ills that beset the planet and create a wonderful future. We can anchor the vision in our minds and hearts through prayer, contemplation, and meditation, and also through immersing ourselves in good messages from others. We can select books, articles, video clips, and documentaries that show the potential beauty and abundance available to us. When we hold the vision with others, we support our own inner vision and affirm it in others. In our conversations, we can admit to our new inner compass. We can talk about working on zero waste in our homes, about composting, about a wonderful wild swim or walk in nature. We have an innate human urge to tell one another stories. By holding a clear image of the future that we want, and by sharing our stories with one another, we strengthen our new vision and help it to spread. We can let go of the old story of economic growth, of having more toys than our neighbours, and imagine something better. There's a similar urge that exists within us to conform to the norms of our chosen group. I see the norms shifting steadily and inexorably from economic priorities to more people-friendly and planet-friendly priorities. By imagining our future and sharing our stories, we help to shift these norms further in the direction that we want to go. So to recap, the 5 things we can do are: 1, feed the right wolf by spending money consciously. 2, we can live more simply. 3, advocate for change. 4, connect with others and hold hands. And 5, imagine a brighter, better future. Almost every aspect of modern life takes its toll at the moment, extracting more from the earth than it puts back. The IPCC reports show that we are ridiculously close to a precipice of our own making, and that we are repeatedly failing to grasp the nettle and reimagine how our lives and societies can work without fossil energy. At times, I fear for our very survival. At other times, I feel a huge grief for the harm we have already caused to our rivers and seas, plants and animals, and the wider human family. But we can imagine a future that is clear and clean and beautiful. We can create wholesome human interactions all around us. We can immerse ourselves in the sheer enjoyment of nature and meet all of our needs from the abundant earth. We can create a society that holds each person and the land and the waters around us in love and care and warmth. It will take work and dedication and one another, but it can be done. And I invite you to adopt something from each of the 5 things that I've mentioned, and to work on this coming week, and together we can watch a beautiful future unfold before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Féidhilim, for that. And indeed, thank you to all our speakers for speaking, and for speaking to time as well. I think actually slightly short of time, so we have probably an extra 5 minutes for this next section. Although, of course, it will go on for as long as it is needed to go on for. We now move into the plenary discussion part of our gathering. For anyone who is familiar with how Zoom conferences normally go, or anyone who is unfamiliar for that matter, there is a chat function for Zoom. So if you have a question, or if you have something for any one of the speakers, or if you have something that you would like to share or discuss, please use the chat function. You can type hands up, as in hands up, and then that way I will know that you want to speak and I can find a way to unmute you. Or more simply, if you just want to type your question into the chat function, you can do that as well. But if you have something you'd like to share, please use the chat function, type in hands up, or to type your question or what you would like to share. And also, if our 3 speakers want to unmute themselves as well, so that they can answer. For anyone who can't see in the chat, Oana has also just said this is a good time for a stretch as well. So if you have been sitting down, I can see you all stretching now. If you have been sitting down for the past hour, stretch.
Let's remember that we're all in bodies.
Yes. Oana, are you waving to someone, or are you saying that you would like to speak?
I have a question, or
Yes, of course.
a reflection maybe. I was just thinking too about how hard it is to think about the complexity of the world that we live in, and I was connecting through 2 points from Féidhilim's and Denise's talks. From Féidhilim's about talking about how. Oh, I'm hearing some strange sounds. Okay. Talking about being conscious of the way that we spend money, and then thinking, as somebody who's been in universities for a few years at the moment, just how much resistance I've had to the. Oh, sorry. I think maybe because I'm hearing an echo. I don't know if others are.
Yes, I'm hearing an echo as well. I think I will mute everybody bar yourself, just
Okay.
so that everyone can hear you a little clearer. Do go ahead, Oana.
So just the resistance that I've had to travel for conferences. So I've actually never traveled for a conference, and thinking about the role that Zoom is playing in our current reality, but then even having to think more complexly about the economy of Zoom as well, and how, so this is a company that's made an incredible amount of money during the pandemic, and just a very brief search through their board of directors and through kind of just the details of the company and the lack of transparency about how the money is being used has made me look for alternatives to Zoom. And so here I am on the platform that I'm critiquing, and just, I guess this is just to make the point of that aspect of our sort of political, just inevitably political reality. Just by doing anything in the world, we are engaging in some way politically with the world. And it's not always possible to bypass the harms that we don't want to be complicit in, but we do have a responsibility as possible in our lives to be aware of and to look for alternatives. And if we know people who are programmers and who can make similar platforms, maybe to invest in different possibilities. So just, I guess my point is just about the complexity of the world and about how money travels. And yeah, if anybody else had any reflection on that, it was something that came up for me during hearing the other speakers.
Yeah, no, it is. It's definitely something that, just as you were speaking there, it ran to me that there are a lot of sort of eco-friendly search engines. Ecosia is the one that sort of springs to mind that I use, where every time you search, you plant a tree, because they use the advertising revenue to plant more trees and plant forests in the parts of the world that need them the most. And it would actually be really interesting to see if there is a more eco-friendly, environmentally helpful version of Zoom. And if not, if we do know any platforms, it would definitely be really good. Perhaps EcoQuakers should look into making an eco-friendly version of Zoom, or perhaps we should. There are a few questions here in the chat. So this is from unless it's specifically said somewhere, I'm going to assume the question is for the whole panel of speakers. And this is from Karen and Kerry Nicholson. So what can or should we do as a religious society across this island to bring about a more equal and sustainable society? So I'll throw that open to our panel if anyone has an answer to that. Oh, sorry, Denise, let me unmute you.
Re-muted yourself.
If one thing that comes to mind immediately that is not very difficult to do is to make sure that our meeting houses are actually energy efficient and working well, and to try to make them available to others in the community, other worthwhile groups in the community at a very affordable cost. This is something that we've been trying to do in Cork meeting. We have a new extension to our meeting house, and the original one was refurbished. And we tried to make it everything done in as sustainable a way as possible, with the result that the building is now tremendously too hot because it's so well insulated. But that's just the irony of this warm summer that we're having. But I think, if we try to make our own resources available to those in the community at an affordable cost, that's something that we can do in the immediate future.
Féidhilim or Oana, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I do, something very briefly. I think Denise's point about getting multiple uses out of our meeting houses is a very, very important point. That we have a chunk of embodied energy and resources, and to make sure that that's as available, you lower the cost per use if you can diversify the uses that are there. One of the things that I'd quite like to see within the society as a whole is that our relationship with the earth would become really central to our expression of our lives as friends, and that we, as we walk on the earth as friends, we do so quite overtly, gently, and I know it's within the spices, the simplicity or the sustainability and simplicity elements of that, of our traditions, but to do so quite overtly, so that all of our business meetings, integrity is integral to all of the decisions that we make. That's generally a given. Simplicity isn't necessarily, and while it often is, it's not often it's not always a root of what we do. But to really, I suppose, to really ground all of our discussions in an awareness of the impacts that we have on the earth and its inhabitants, human and otherwise.
Brilliant. The chat is now filling up with questions. So you've the three of you, well done. You've provoked a lot of thought from our group. So this is from Marian. Wonderful talk, so practical and deeply spiritual. Thank you all so much. What about the arms industry's huge contribution to environmental destruction and Ireland's participation in PESCO? Could you comment on destructive militarization of interconnections of Mother Earth? So if anyone has anything they'd like to say on that.
Well, I think the arms industry spends about $1.9 trillion per year in the US alone. And if we could just grow up and stop spending money on killing one another and spend money on healing the earth, what resources there'd be suddenly to do that. It's a matter of consciousness. It's very straightforward. We're looking at the illusion of separation between us, and that's baloney, Denise, you wanted to come in there as well?
Yeah, I made a bit of a reference to this in the kind of vision of the future that I imagined, that you can also ask, why do countries go to war? Sometimes it's just because there's a nut in charge of the country, but sometimes it's because of limited resources, fear for the future, a feeling that you need more land to feed your people. And if we can move towards a future in which resources are shared more equitably, I think that would go a good ways towards starting to make us understand that we can actually live without war. It's certainly something that needs to be done. So any kind of peace work, anti-war work, is actually environmental work.
Yeah, I'll add I think I would always bring in the kind of more internal work, the individual in community internal work that I think we could do as friends. And some of that internal work is I think we have a lot of resistance, even when we talk about simplicity, we have a lot of resistance to really looking at the flow of money and looking at kind of doing a self-audit. So I've heard of people individually doing a self-audit of sort of everything they buy, everything they invest in, how much they travel, but looking at a self-audit for our meetings and our members, so individual members doing a self-audit for how their money is navigating in the world. And there's shame around money. There's discomfort around it, and that's something that we can deal with. I think that part of that is beginning to see the work that we need to do not as extra work or as a burden, but as an invitation to greater life. And so one of the things that I've heard a lot in the recent uprising in the US and the fight for Black Lives Matter is that it's exhausting to do the work, and that there's so much else that we have to think about. And so I guess just a change in perspective as, doing this kind of research, educating ourselves on where our investments lie, which I know has happened, but also educating ourselves about what the society in which we function, how it's functioning within the global economy and within global investments and war. And I have to do that work as well. But I think just shifting that idea from a burden to a sense of like, this is actually an invitation to a greater sense of life.
Thank you. I see Pauline Goggin has her hand up. So Pauline, I'm going to unmute you. And if you have a question or something you'd like to share, please go ahead. Give me a second here. Pauline, if you want to unmute yourself maybe, because I'm trying to do it and it doesn't seem to be working.
Okay, is that better?
That's better, yes.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. It's just so inspiring and spiritually uplifting listening to the speakers, and the questions are great so far. On the one about the arms trade fair, or the arms trade industry, and I recently participated in a course run by the organization World Beyond War. And what they've done is they've come up with a conversion tablet or a conversion system which shows alternative uses for the money that is now being spent on the industrial arms trade. And it's absolutely fantastic. And in terms of holding vision, there is a little animated film made by the Senator Ocasio-Cortez, one of the young women who got into the Senate in the USA in the elections, which actually shows that vision at work. And it's actually a lovely animation to see the kinds of things that Denise was proposing, and Féidhilim and Oana at work. And so I would recommend that. But I was at a meeting last week of a new chapter that is trying to be set up in Ireland at the moment by some people from the World Beyond War organization. And part of the conversation was around making connections because so many of the concerns about the earth and the destruction of the earth overlap. And so that was one thing. But one of the ideas also that came up was, I wonder if we could somehow produce a conversion table that would actually help people to see where the money could be spent, because I think it would give people a lot more confidence when speaking truth to power. It's particularly around PESCO, which in effect is a European army. And I'm not good at maths, and I certainly don't have those skills, but I think it's something that maybe some of us could put our minds to.
Thank you for that, Pauline. If any of our speakers have anything they'd like to contribute to that. Oh, very well. Well, thank you very much for speaking, Pauline. That was Really, really beautiful. It's nice to get other people involved in the video conversation, but we do have lots and lots of questions filling into the chat. So this one is from Hilda, and she is saying, I feel like this is a good time to advocate for change, in particular in the area of education and care of the elderly. Both areas have struggled during the pandemic and probably will continue to do so. Any idea on these topics? So.
One thing I would maybe mention that might offer some hope for something like this is that, you know, before the pandemic came, the idea that the sort of public and private hospitals, healthcare facilities could in any way work together was probably considered unrealistic. And, you know, the two systems were very different and they couldn't possibly actually really unite. But once it was just absolutely necessary to join forces to try to deal with the virus, things, you know, working together between different arms of the health services and different types of health services became easy, just absolutely easy. We have one of the healthcare workers in Cork meeting has said that she would just go into work and be told, you know, where she was going to be working that day. And it could be any institution in the city. And I guess the reason I mention this is not to lose hope that some of these areas that do need change can actually get that change. If it's perceived as really being needed, it can happen.
Yes, Féidhilim and Oana, anything you'd like to add to that, or will I move on to the next question? I will move on. So again, oh, sorry, no, Féidhilim.
My only thoughts about the pandemic are that I loved lockdown. You know, I just found it amazing. The traffic noise vanished. We could go for a walk locally and not worry about traffic. We could talk to one another on the roads. Bird song was really loud. Air, water, all around the world began to clear. And it's as we come out of lockdown that I look around and begin to panic, because I see everything returning back to a really hard push on economic growth all over again, and it just looks like a disaster. And it's the drive towards economic growth is really only a one-way street off the edge of a cliff, and I don't see any way out of it around the whole climate and biodiversity issues without stepping way back from economic growth. And the pandemic has shown us that that's possible. It's possible to prioritize other things. And in terms of how we care for those people who are isolated by the pandemic, it's very, very important, obviously, to link up with them and to hold hands together as a community. But in terms of the wider changes in the world, I was delighted to see it. Oana?
I was sitting a little bit with Hilda's question because I think it's something I think about quite a bit. And I'm wondering whether the question is, how, you know, can we advocate for change as friends, or is it just like as citizens? Is that something that what we need to engage in? And I think about that all the time about my relationship to the Society of Friends is, if we say that we position ourselves socially as a religious society that has a kind of moral imperative and thinks about these ethical things, I often feel that we feel very reluctant to take up that position. And I don't know if that's a question for meetings, if that's a kind of a query that could be developed, or something about, you know, are these social questions something that we should be revisiting often? And is this a political position that we can just comfortably take up, which I personally obviously think that we should. I think that's all I want to say about that.
Our next question comes from Claudia Tormy. Yes, Tormy. I'm terrible at distinguishing N's from M's. So from Claudia Tourmy, thank you so much to all the speakers and organisers. I just want to say something in response to Féidhilim and somewhat echoes what Oana is saying. I feel it's so important to acknowledge our privilege and that only some of us have choice and access to shop eco, etc. Also, not everyone has access to digital technologies such as Zoom. And those of us holding such privilege should do more of the advocacy work that Féidhilim also spoke of, so we can use it powerfully. We do what we can in the places we are.
I'd like to just mention something there, which is that I think it's important for us to recognize our position of privilege when we're in it, but also recognize forms of equality that may not be absolutely obvious. And I was interested recently to learn that Britain Yearly Meeting has set up a new fund to essentially ensure, I guess, help ensure technology equality. So if somebody is not in a position to have paid for internet or to have paid for some device to actually use with something like Zoom or Jitsi or whatever, they can actually apply to get a Quaker grant to allow them to do this. It's only a small part of the picture, but I thought it was an intriguing example of recognizing a new type of inequality which had arisen and trying to address it.
Yes, no, it's becoming I'm a little tongue-tied now, sorry about that, but all of these things going, it is definitely something that I've noticed a lot over the past 4 months is, you know, I have a general assumption that everyone has easy access to technology, and I think that's an assumption that most of the world makes, because at the start of this, when I still had a job, they were expecting us to Zoom in every day, and we had meetings, and they were expecting us to be checking our work emails every day. And it's surprising how many people don't have easy access to a computer or to a stable internet connection as well. It's and that's what really made the rural broadband scheme hit home for me, because especially for people in rural areas of Ireland, they don't have easy access to this kind of things. And that is, especially when we keep talking about a sustainable world, and technology is playing a big part of it. Of course, part of that is making sure that everyone has access to that technology, which just gives us more food for thought. The next question I have here in the chat is from Deirdre McNamon. Again, I'm terrible with M's and N's, people. Deirdre McNamon. I think we all need the friends, politicians and teachers and children do a course in permaculture to understand the interconnected design of it all, because there are so many gaps in our thinking which would quickly awaken consciousness and connection. Non-violent communication would also help in our meetings as a start. Any thoughts on that?
What a dream. What an amazing dream. I mean, I would love to see that happen. I think I try not to proselytize too much, but it's mentioned in my bio that I am part of a growing network of people who are working to bridge spirituality and political activism through the work of Joanna Macy, who was a systems thinker. And so this Active Hope Network is a way to try to, I don't like to use the word infiltrate because it's like the war terminology, but the idea that all of these deep ideological changes that need to happen, that can begin with us, can begin with this meeting, with our individual meetings where we begin, and then to ripple outwards. And so it's like I couldn't speak to how exactly we would get all friends, politicians, and teachers to do permaculture courses, except to keep talking about it all the time and to everyone I meet. So that's just, yeah, I can share more information about the work that Active Hope Network does, maybe in a follow-up email. That's okay.
If you'll excuse me.
I just say that there's a permaculture course, there's a 10-day permaculture course in Cloughjordan every year. And I'll be doing their water module this summer. And if anybody wants to sign up to do a permaculture module and then bring that training back to their local meeting house, that's one way to bring that vision into reality.
Brilliant. If you could excuse my ignorance, and maybe I'm not the only one who's thinking this, perhaps you could explain a little bit more about what permaculture is.
Yeah, just in a nutshell, it was developed by David Holmgren and Bill Mollison in the 1970s in Australia in response to the oil crisis at the time, and basically looking at natural systems and seeing how do we create systems that meet human needs without impacting negatively on the environment. So it's that straightforward, really. So the name is Permanent Culture or Permanent Agriculture, and it's built on the acknowledgement that we don't have a permanent culture. We're not. Everything we do, even the technology that we're busy trying to equalize between people, is tremendously damaging. You know, the data banks that are being built in order to support Facebook and Google and Zoom and all the data storage that we have has a huge carbon footprint. And so, you know, the more we can stay offline, the better ecologically. So I don't think it's a good idea for everybody in the world to have equal access to Zoom. I think it'd be better for none of us to have access to Zoom or the cars to get us to our meeting houses, you know, at least for a block of time until we figure out how to do so in a way that doesn't screw up everybody else's chances of survival. Excuse my language.
No, that's good. Deirdre, I saw that you put your hand up there, and now you've taken it down. So I was just wondering if you wanted to add a little bit more to.
Yeah. So the reason that I've been thinking, I've been meditating and praying about this for a really long time, and it's based on kind of understanding what happened in Northern Ireland and how we got the peace process. And there are different processes that you can employ, and it is about, you know, the Gandhi philosophy of be the change you want to see in the world. And with permaculture, you start with yourself. You look at what changes. You're basically ground zero, if you like, and what you do with yourself impacts everything else. And then every other zone around you, you go out and make tweaks in that to make yourself more sustainable. And so it is a practical toolkit on how we can walk more gently on the earth practically on a day-to-day basis, so that you kind of look at, you know, the weather around you, you look at the places that you go every day, you look at what seeds you can plant in that area, so that then if there is a time where the networks go down and the Zoom calls fail and stuff, you've got that bank of knowledge that's able to be not only sustainable for yourself, but all the other people that pass those patterns on. It's a very pattern-based area. It's a very human response. And it also makes people very aware of the bigger side. But it's a conceptual turning everything on its head. But it's only a week, whereas most of the people that I know that have got to this stage, you know, it took us years of looking here and looking there and looking at trying to find solutions. In permaculture, you've got an application and a design that, if applied properly from a philosophical perspective as well as a physical perspective, I think it empowers your schools, because if you get because we do it in New Zealand and we've got a few permaculture schools or schools that have applied it, and so the kids see all the differences that you can make in your environment, how you manage your water, how you manage your food production, how you manage cleanliness, how you manage talking to each other and stuff. And so you start that, and if we teach the teachers to do it, then the teachers change their behavior. And one of the things that I've noticed as a therapist is a lot of the people that come to me are still dealing with stuff that wasn't resolved because of power dynamics with teachers, and those things get resolved through the process. So I think it's really worth Friends looking at it. And Friends School over in Wanganui, it became Wanganui Eco Community Quaker Settlement, and they've adopted permaculture principles there, and so you can see how a community of friends can live and work employing permaculture patterns. And I think, you know, if we're going to, part of the problem of this time is there's so many different things, and with Zoom and everything is great, but you can get scattered because, like, I missed totally all the emails about the eco stuff because I was working on a plastic-free thing and didn't see it. So, but if you've got, if we concentrate around this system that can help support people to be empowered to affect change in their everyday lives, then we can be more consistent. Sorry, that's my...
No, thank you for contributing. I've just noticed that there are quite a few people who physically have their hand up. I'm so sorry I didn't see you because I was looking at the chat for hands going up there. So I see Felicity and Janet. So Felicity's waving terribly. So I'll go for Felicity first and then to Janet, and then anyone else who has their hand up, I will get to you. So again, just a little bit of patience. But Felicity, there, if I've unmuted you. Or possibly you want to unmute yourself because that just doesn't seem to work for me.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Brilliant, I can hear you.
Myself now. Yeah, sorry, I've typed in before, but I never know how to send it. Never seems to leave me. No, I just, Kerry mentioned, was it militarism, and then Pauline mentioned it as well. And I mean, there's a bit of a difference between militarism and militarization. And this is something the UK government is pouring huge, over the last number of years, without necessarily, with what do you call it, underhand way, huge amounts of money into militarization. And the Britain Yearly Meeting is Quaker Peace and Social Witness. The British one has made an 8-minute film about sort of maybe 4 years ago or so called The Unseen March. And then an independent director asked Britain Yearly Meeting, they were wanting to make a film, and Britain Yearly Meeting put money into this other film. It's an 8-minute long film called War School. So I managed to eventually persuade our meeting to show that September last year. And about 23 people from our meeting turned up, which I was pleased about, and 2 from Frederick Street meeting. And I know the evening was a success because somebody asked me, could they have the recipe of the fruit loaf that I'd made for that evening. But I had got a veteran for peace to come in February when I was to show the Quaker film, The Unseen March. But he got stuck in Scotland, and so we were trying to arrange another date to show The Unseen March, have this veteran for peace talking to us, and then he got stuck in Scotland, and then lockdown happened. So I'm beginning to think nothing's going to happen, but I don't know if anybody has heard of the film War School.
Yes.
Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, but it looks like it should be quite good. It's on my list of things to watch at some point.
Yeah, well, I'm glad about that because I haven't heard not the current, but the former principal of Friends School Lisburn. Because what part of this is about the way the government is trying to persuade schools to have what you call them, you know, bring the cadet forces and all this sort of thing. And colleges are getting grants from all these military companies, and so on and so on. It's just mind-bogglingly horrible. And I asked her about it. Did she think schools in Northern Ireland were being affected by this? And she just said, I don't think it's a problem. But when I spoke to the veteran for peace, he was saying it's a huge problem. And I mean, just when you read what's happening, militarization is just awful. Sorry, thanks.
No, thank you for adding your voice to that. It's interesting how at the end of the day everything always does come back to peace whenever we get Quakers talking. Do you know where people might be able to access that film War School? Would they be able to order it online, or is there a platform?
Online. Online. I mean, meetings all over Britain. I mean, Scottish friends have got their Scottish government to discuss it, which is quite something. And I think it's just, I was given a YouTube initially, but I'm sure it's just Google war school.
school.
Yeah.
I think you'll find it. Isn't that right, Denise?
I think so, yes. It's a full-length free film that you can view on YouTube. If you just put in War School film into your browser, you'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We're more homework. Janet, you've had your hand up for a very long time. Thank you for your patience. If you want to unmute yourself, I will be able to hear you.
Two things. On permaculture, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Irish Seed Savers are doing a workshop on it on November the 7th. One of the things we're working on in Irish Seed Savers is, in fact, soil fertility and how it's impacted by modern agricultural methods. Second point, on war. Why are we facilitating American arms and troops going out to the east? Why are we facilitating that in the Republic?
I think that's a very good question, and it's unfortunately been a very pertinent question for a very long time. I don't really want to bounce this one onto the panel because it's such a heavy question, but I'm going to bounce this one onto the panel.
Just a very personal experience. I spent one day walking with the two American veterans who were stuck in Ireland last year, and got a tremendous education, and also I don't want to say shame, but I just thought a sense of like, if at their age and in the segment of life that they've arrived in, that they've decided just to dedicate the rest of their lives to bringing this message. And unfortunately, I can't remember their names at the moment, but I do think this is, as with the Committee for Eco Quakers, I think that often when something gets put into a committee, the rest, there's a sense that like somebody's working on it and the rest of us don't have to. And it was actually one of my, one of the reasons I was reluctant to kind of join the Committee for Eco Quakers, aside from other, just having other responsibilities, was that I don't want to contribute to this idea that only one group is thinking about the environment when it's something that affects all of us. And it's the same with the question of this incredible cognitive dissonance of being a religious society that's dedicated, that has a peace testimony, that this isn't something that we talk about anywhere regularly enough.
Yes, thank you, Oana, and thank you, Janet. I would also like to reiterate that, yes, just because EcoQuakers exists does not give you a free pass to not think about the environment. I think we should all be working on it and thinking about it on a daily basis. And hopefully, from what we've learned today, more of us will start to do that. Now, again, I'm seeing more questions in the chat, so I'll try and bang through a few of these. So this is from Carmel Duffy and Trim. The monotheistic patriarchal religions seem to have, in some of their root assumptions, or in how they are interpreted, a divisive and unhealthy attitude to the East, to nature, seeing man as not a part of nature, fill the earth and subdue it, in quotation marks, etc. While people of faith and goodwill can work within our traditions for better ways of being, we need to examine and question some of the notions at the root of this, I think.
Yeah. Can I say something about that? There's been a little bit of interaction in the chat about this, and the value of sometimes referring to the divine as feminine as well, as being much more inclusive. But one thing I would suggest is that really, does the divine have a sex? Sometimes I think we should refer to God as just God and avoid saying her or him or they or it at all. But if we do think of it as somehow having a sex, let's think of it as having both, right? Because we need both. There are attributes we think of as being male and attributes that we think of as being female. And whatever this thing is that's God has got to be the best of both. And we do need to think about this and try to be inclusive in our language and how we make use of our traditional scriptures.
Yes, Oana?
And then just one perspective that I have, just because of the research that I do, is that a lot of the patriarchal structure within scripture that is used and within the language that is used is also a product of history and translation. And it's important in a way for us to think of the literature that we have as a form of palimpsest, and that it's layered, and that there have been different ages where the text has been translated or has been, and text itself in a form could be considered as a form of sort of social dominance, because there was human existence before text. So I think just thinking, I'm in a position to be sort of recovering what's in there and recovering what is life-giving, and always thinking through this perspective that that there have been sort of layers of patriarchy that have adulterated. So there is no kind of origin. This isn't, in a way, like even these ideas aren't at the root of, that's what I want to suggest, is that it isn't at the root of Quaker practice or Christian practice, is that there have always been changes throughout history.
Deirdre, again, I see that you have your hand up. If you want to unmute yourself, and feel free to join in.
Thank you. It's also worth noticing that the original texts were not gender specific, you know, so what Una is saying is absolutely correct, but all the original texts, because we went and studied them, and before the printing press, the texts that were given down were neutral and you know, and worked for both sexes. So, and the other thing to think about, I think there's two things that need to happen. One is the feminine needs to be honoured within our meetings and within our daily dialogue, because if we're going to achieve anything for Mother Earth, we've got to be okay with accepting the body of the feminine. And there's a big connection between domestic abuse, eating disorders, and our treatment of the planet on a bigger scale. And one radical thing that we can do is to be aware of how we use language and how nuanced that difference in male and female on power dynamics, and things like, you know, the fact that we've got 3 male leaders of the political parties that are supposed to be leading the whole country, that's made up of 50% people, and there's no men that I've heard made a comment about that. And so we need men to kind of stand into that and kind of go, that's not fair, that doesn't represent anybody, male or female. You know, it doesn't help the men thrive or the women thrive, but it means that we get unbalanced decisions, so it's harder to move the political wheels forward to make the changes that need to happen. There you go, that's me over now.
Again, thank you very much, Deirdre. I've noticed, if anyone hasn't been connecting with the chat, I do urge you to get involved with it, or even just look at it, because there are a lot of links to various resources that have been put into the chat over the past sort of 20 minutes or so, and I won't be reading out all of them. I'll just be going for questions.
Can I make a quick point as well? If you, down by where you would enter your own messages, there's a little thing with 3 dots probably. If you press on that, one of the options there is save chat. And if you do that, you get everything just downloaded to your computer, so you don't have to worry about madly trying to type in the links before they disappear. All
right. Where would we find that? Because I'm trying to find that now myself.
Down.
Yes.
Enter your own over to the right on my machine, there's 3 dots.
Yes. So just above where you would type in a message, there are 3 dots, and the first option is save chat. So if you want to save some of those links, which I'm going to do, I would recommend that. But do have a look at that, and do save the chat, because there's a lot in there, and I don't know if I'll get the chance to go through all of it. But there was a lot of discussion about an organization called World Beyond War, and there was a question from Pauline Goggin. The organization worldbeyondwar.org has produced a conversion table for seeing where the current arms manufacturing profits could be spent on education, health and food security, employment in renewable energy possibility. Could we support an Irish version of this?
That's a very interesting idea. It would probably, I mean, maybe this is something that the Peace Committee could look into, not necessarily doing it, but trying to identify friends who have the right knowledge to help with this.
Yes. There's another one here from, again, Carmel Duffy. Years ago, I read how SF in NW of USA withheld the percentage of their taxes that were spent on war. Some did jail for it. I've seen that as well. It's if you just have a look at it on YouTube, there is a Quaker Speak video about it, and it's very, very good and very informative. But would that work here is the question.
Try it and see.
Yeah, it's an intriguing idea. I mean, it's the history of doing things like this in Quakerism goes all the way back to the beginnings of the movement. I mean, not paying tithes in first instance, but I think even in John Woolman's day, there was the idea of not paying monies that would go to supporting war. So if there were some way to do this, it would be an effective way to make a point in any case.
I suppose the challenge that comes with that is, well, in America, everyone has the ability everyone is required to file their own taxes, whereas over here in Ireland and in the UK as well, unless you are self-employed, your employer will calculate your taxes and will deduct them for you. So is there a way for us who pay our taxes as we are paid our wages, is there a way for us to not pay our taxes because some of the money is being used for spending? Yes, Denise.
It'd be more important, actually, even than trying to figure out how to do that, is to actually determine what fraction of people's taxes generally goes to war or preparations for war and military. Not just peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is a bit of a different issue. I wouldn't want to muddy the waters with that. But if we could actually come up with some sort of fraction of people's taxes that goes to aggression, and make people in general more aware of this, that could be very effective as well.
Was in the UK, can you hear me?
Yes.
In the UK, there was a peace tax campaign years ago. And I mean, Friends were very much involved in it, of course, but not only Friends, but the entire staff at Friends House in London, you know, the head office of Britain Yearly Meeting, withheld taxes for years. And it had been worked out a certain proportion, as Denise was saying, a certain proportion of what your taxes go to military, and they were withholding it to be spent in a peacemaking thing of some kind. I mean, after years of that, I don't remember that anybody actually went to jail, but after quite a long number of years, it was given up to that. Anyway, the peace tax, I don't think it exists anymore.
Right. We are sort of coming to the end of the allotted time, but I noticed there were 2 people who did want to say something. Janice has her hand up, and then also Féidhilim wanted to speak to something about the question of militarization. So I think we'll let Janice go first, and then Féidhilim afterwards. So Janice, yes, you're unmuted now. Go ahead.
Yes, I remember years ago, it must be, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
At least, more than 20 years ago now, a friend from our meeting, Helen Horton, was going to try doing that. And she was talking to someone who could work out how much tax she would have to retain. And in fact, she was interviewed on radio about it, and she said she wouldn't mind doing jail because she knew a lot of people there already because she's worked with in Mountjoy. I don't know what happened to that campaign. Maybe we should ask her.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea. Perhaps reviving some old campaigns now is a good idea. Féidhilim, if you want to speak on that, or if you want to speak on something else.
Just very briefly, just on the subject of militarism, for my part, I find that how much money the US spends on military stuff, toys, for example, is completely beyond what I can see myself contributing to. And so what I do with that is I come back each time to asking the question, okay, well, what can I do? What's in front of me? Like Deirdre was saying, what seeds can I plant locally? What seeds will grow well in the hearts and minds of the people around me? And militarism isn't one of those things that I feel able to address directly. Something obviously that I feel very, very strongly about. But in order to deal with that, there's so much by way of a foundation to militarism that also needs to be tackled. I'm not explaining myself terribly clearly. If I can do the things that I can do and let go of the things that I feel are too much, then something gets done. If I begin to feel overwhelmed because there's too much to do and avoid doing the things that I can do, there's an opportunity lost. So for friends who are here who think, yes, I would love to get involved in a military taxes campaign, great. And if there's friends here who think, do you know what? That's going to be too much for me. I can't do that. I'm just going to go back to eating ice cream out of a plastic tub out of the freezer because that's the only thing that I can see to do in the next 5-minute block of time that isn't just completely overwhelming. Then just put the militarism or whatever it is to one side and see, well, what can I do? I can go for Nobo, the vegan ice cream, and locally made or whatever. Just all I'm really saying is be wary of overwhelm. It can be very debilitating. And if you can keep your horizon slightly open and simply do the thing you can do, but to try to strengthen that muscle each time, each time there's an opportunity to spend money. Can I spend it on this or that? Each time there's an opportunity to not spend money, can I just do that? When there's an opportunity to reach out to somebody and forge a connection with somebody, can I do that? If something really irks me, I'll write to a politician or a business person, and then to, enjoy the sunshine and visualize something wonderful.
If I could just add something to that, we have a long-standing tradition in Quakerism of doing precisely what Féidhilim has said. We refer to a particular person being led to do a particular thing, or a particular person being led to take up a concern. We don't expect everybody to do everything. So this is actually our way.
Yes.
All right, friends, we are coming to the end of our scheduled time. So I would like to end with a few moments silence, but if anyone has any final question that they'd like to ask or any advice or thoughts that they'd like to share before we bring the gathering to an end, please do so now, either in the chat or I am looking at all of your videos, so just by waving your hand as well. Yes, Lil, if you want to unmute yourself there.
I'd just like to say thank you to everybody.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks to everybody. I've really enjoyed this. I haven't participated, but it's wonderful listening to everybody. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you very, very much, Lil. Thank you. So unless there's anything else that friends would like to share, well, then I think it would be nice to end with a few moments silence to reflect on what has been said over the past 2 hours and to take some advice and some practical steps as we leave this eco gathering. So before we go into silence, thank you all very, very much for attending. Thank you for everyone who has contributed, speakers and participants. This was a lot of, I was quite nervous in organizing this. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, or we as a committee have ever done anything like this, but I thought it went very, very well. And I've been very encouraged by all the thanks and all the feedback that we've gained from you. And hopefully, as the months and weeks go by, we'll organize a few more of these. Thank you very much, friends. Go in peace. I hope the weather where you are is as nice as it is for me where I am. So we have some nice God-given good weather. So go out, enjoy nature, stay safe, be well, and I hope to see you all, if not physically, then virtually, very soon. Thank you very much.
Please don't
Bye.
forget to send us the link.
I'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of the recording. Don't worry.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye now. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye everybody.
Bye, Andrew.
Bye.
Go, Maggot.
Slán.
Thanks, everyone.
You're really baggy.
You did great.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good job.
That's actually really nice to see everybody just signing up one by one. It's really like seeing people leave a meeting house. I'm still recording this as well. It's important to have the lighter parts in the recording as well. Okay, I'll end the meeting for everyone now.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
See you
much.
all soon.
Wonderful.